Hi and welcome to what is the final lecture for this course, Introduction to Cultural Studies. So we'll just wind up the course very briefly with a discussion on the text that we've covered, and also looking at some of the general things that have been covered in this course and how they can potentially connect to some of the other kinds of research that one can think of taking up. So I have with me my two TAs who have been very helpful and quite instrumental in running this course. So could you please introduce yourselves?
Hi everyone, I'm Lakshmi Chitra. I'm a research scholar at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Madras.
Hi, I'm Shirshi Roy. I'm a student of English Studies at IIT Madras.
Okay, thanks so much, Lakshmi and Shirshi. So what we'll do right now, we'll just initiate a discussion on this course in terms of looking at the text that we have covered so far. So let's start with Orwell's Shooting an Elephant, right? So what do you think, how do you think that particular text connects to some of the things we covered in cultural studies?
So first of all, I think we have to talk about the code, which is like what Orwell's protagonist stands for in the text. He plays out the role of the white male with the rifle as a signifier of power and authority. But as and when we proceed, we also see how his agency in the entire text is liquefied, because by the end of it, he is not sure if he's acting on his will or because he's performing his power because of his position. So these are the few things we see in the text.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Lakshmi, do you think there's something that you can add to that?
I think I got a different perspective about colonizer, colonized.
Yeah.
Like other than that, what we usually see from the post-colonial perspective.
Yes.
So how power works differently rather than in a very linear way.
Yes.
So that was a different perspective that I got from the.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a way, both of you, it's really interesting because both of you are saying things which are taken up later by Bhabha in the essay, The Other Question, where he actually says exactly what you just said, and that is the entire dynamics of power needs to be problematized in a colonial space. So it just doesn't rest entirely on the colonizer, with the colonized being completely powerless and passive. So there's a very complex dynamic of power in operation in that particular essay, Shooting an Elephant. And like you said, the question of agency becomes very important, right? As Shirshi said, there's a degree of liquidation of agency which takes place. So in effect, he becomes a machine performing the colonial will, which is in complete contrast to his human will. It doesn't want to shoot the elephant at a human level, but then realizes that that's completely redundant, and all he has to protect and perpetuate is the colonial will and the image, as Shirshi said, of the white man with the rifle that becomes an iconic image of colonialism. So I think it's a very important text in terms of looking at some of the key configurations of power in a colonial setting, how identity politics play out in a racially reified space, in terms of how certain icons become more important than the human element. So there's a degree of dehumanization, commodification, reification as well. Everything is reified, from the dead elephant to the white man, in that kind of hardcore capitalist colonial space. So I think that's a very important text, and that's very interesting observations from your end. Now, taking that and coming to Bhabha's essay, The Other Question, so how do you think his entire definition or ontology of ambivalence plays out in terms of looking at identity politics and cultural studies?
Bhabha takes a lot from Said, and then he goes on to not only make a distinction between the powerful and the powerless, but also talks about this ambivalence where the powerful is not always powerful. He's also sometimes powerless, as we see in this Orwell essay. So that's why there's an ambivalence of colonial power, where the colonizer and the colonized, there's a sort of colonial anxiety which pops up here. So that's what I feel.
So for me, Bhabha was a very seminal text because he introduces even for post-colonialism, it was very important text. Once we had studied it, so he introduces most of the terms from metaphor, metonymy. So the
4-term strategy that he uses.
So he describes the entire setting I think it was for the first time the entire post-colonial scenario was defined so clearly.
So absolutely,
also he brought in the question of comprador and hegemony, like so it gives a better understanding of power even now, like we can analyze it even in our institutions of power and hierarchy.
Exactly, and that's a very good point, because the whole point of doing cultural studies is to see how that's relevant to not just academic settings and textbooks, but also the dailiness of life, the lived reality of life, how, I mean, we can sort of find relevance in terms of looking at what happens around us at an everyday basis, how identities are produced, reproduced, deproduced. I mean, that deproduction of identity is something that I'm very interested in. And as both of you said, what Power does is quite seminal, because he brings in the entire post-structuralist perspective into colonialism.
And also psychology and...
Exactly, right? So he brings in Lacanian psychoanalysis, he brings in sort of Derridan semantic post-structuralism, and that, in a way, that deconstructs the binaristic understanding of colonizer, colonized, which Said had done historically. So, in a way, Power's relationship with Said in terms of looking at the other question is quite interesting, because he pays tribute to Said in terms of locating Said as a founding figure of colonial studies canon, but then again, he problematizes Said's binary in terms of looking at power politics. And also this entire four-term strategy that Power uses, metaphor, metonymy, aggressivity, and narcissism. I mean, how do you think that plays out in the political situation, in the cultural situation we consume today, the entire metaphor, metonymy thing, in terms of how we identify and affiliate ourselves and then de-affiliate ourselves politically, culturally?
But I'm not very sure about this. But now I think we, like, especially with people who are actually into politics, it's more clear rather than like metaphor, metonymy. Like it's more of a very deliberate process than. So I'm not very much sure like how it has turned out, but maybe for the normal like people who are not into politics or subjects whom as it is, it still works out, like how we are like manipulated even at like psychological levels, and even the recent US election, like how people were. So
absolutely. I mean, the entire process of affiliation is through a metonymy process. You are selectively affiliated to someone, and then, of course,
so identity politics and even the right-wing politics, they somehow use this on the subject so that they can gain support. But
absolutely.
I'm not very sure like how the big shots are into this.
Yes. I mean, the entire process of history, history writing, historical identity is getting increasingly metonymic in quality, right? You're just taking certain selected sections of history and then highlighting those sections in order to connect to a broader narrative, which, like you said, is useful for an ideological climate. So I think that is sort of interesting in the way it happens today as well, the entire metonymy metaphor. And also aggressivity and narcissism, right? I mean, how do certain images in the political situations generate narcissism through which people affiliate themselves in terms of identity politics, vote bank politics, etc. And equally, how do political parties manipulate images to create and generate aggression, which is directed against the other party in terms of, antagonizing people against them. So, and I'm thinking of,
in India, for example, we can see how caste politics works out, and then how Dalit person becomes this figurehead for like all the representative head for all the Dalits, and then even though he's not that competent maybe, but they just want this one person out there fighting for the cause of the rest. So
absolutely. It's a very iconic form of representation.
But like even otherwise, when we take the more aggressive right-wing politics, it like at least with Dalit politics, it's different. Like because they were oppressed, but when it comes to the powerful, I think it's again like how they take up some images, how they're actually redefining images, like from Bhagat Singh. So like how they're creating icons who can actually be vehicles of their idea of like the nation, maybe.
Yes. And of course, our nation becomes a very contested category in current politics. I mean, the definition of nation, the ontology of nation, the history of the nation. I mean, what I'm really interested in is how every nation creates its own history, right? I mean, there's a convenient history which is created, which is very selective, like you said, very metonymic. It's just fragments which are taken in and form part of a narrative, which is conveniently, connectable to the situation, ideological situation in that particular point of time. And that's same for almost every country, India, the US, Germany. If you look at the history of really volatile times, whether it's Nazi Germany, began a certain kind of nationalism was rebranded, and certain people were conveniently othered, racially, ethnically, and hence we have the entire violence which is generated against those people. And propaganda plays a very important role in such situations. And of course, like you said, it's getting more sophisticated today through memes and digital media, but still it's propaganda in a very sort of convenient way. So, which brings me to my mind the idea of the postmodern and the idea of the knowledge production in postmodern conditions as examined by Lyotard in his essay. So how do you think that particular essay, the postmodern condition and report on knowledge, fits into some of the things which we see today in our times?
I think for our times, to have mini narratives is as important as ever.
Yes.
Because there is a very deliberate attempt to bring back a grand narrative that would unify the entire nation or the entire community as a whole.
Yes.
Ignoring and deliberately erasing other stories, small stories, small narratives, let it be from women or even other oppressed groups, even Dalits. So their history is continuously erased or manipulated for their own benefit.
Yes.
So I think it's high time that we have very diverse mini narratives. There has been people have been trying to do that throughout, but because there is this deliberate attempt to silence them, so we need more stories like ever. So even with other sexual minorities, and one good thing is that their stories are coming up. For the first time, we are hearing people lesbians, even that Nanette was an example. She was
stories.
coming up with her story. So people all over the world, at least those who didn't have a voice till now, are coming with their version of their stories, which is actually very interesting and which is very much required.
Absolutely.
I think to add to that, the problem of grand narratives is power and control. So as and when if a grand narrative exists and then people think it is the natural way, it is the
the realist way,
the normal. So that's why I think what the recent micro narratives, more and more representation is helping a lot, and then
and it helps more people to come out to bring to tell their own stories, which I think is actually very important to
absolutely. So the question of representation becomes very important. How is representation done? Is it done through a hegemonic form, or is it done through a celebration of interruptions? So interruptions are not just accommodated but celebrated. And when you talk about gender, when you talk about complex gender politics, complex gender identities, then interruptions and interstitial identities become more important than seamless identities, right? So which, obviously Lyotard speaks a lot on that, but then towards the end of the book, A Report on Knowledge, he sort of critiques the entire idea of the public space, the very Habermasian idea of public space, which he thinks can very quickly lend itself to another grand narrative, right? Which can be hegemonic, Eurocentric, elitist in quality. So how do you think we could look at public space today?
Right now, I don't think public space is as accepting as it even when we say about mini narratives, public space is still sticking to the normal, at least in India.
Okay.
But there are public spaces which accommodates only a certain kind of mini narratives.
Right.
Where the there was this huge discussion on plastic straws, which was supposed to be there was a campaign that plastic straws should be banned because it's polluting the oceans. So then there was this disabled activist who told that for disabled people it's very much required that they need straws, otherwise it's difficult, for some of them who are bedridden or on wheelchairs. But a space, apparently this notion is a mini narrative, we should ban plastic straws because it was a different voice, it was not there till now. So using plastic straws was norm till now. But when somebody voiced something against this, this is our concern, the activists could not take that. So this means how the space which is supposed to be diverse or accepting is changing to another kind of grand narrative which can't accept some other views.
Absolutely, What do you think, Shashi?
Yeah, so I think it's sort of paradoxical in nature as well. We are having so many micro narratives in the forming, and that eventually is leading to another sort of grand narrative, which might be problematic.
Yeah.
But I also think that the digital space, the digital world has helped a lot in maybe like lending an ear to and hearing these voices out. So that is what has like contributed to the intersectional representation.
Absolutely. I mean, the entire ontology of public space has changed. I mean, one can make the argument that Facebook is a public space now, or Twitter is a public space now, because, we tweet something and it's consumed by a large section of people.
Like everyone is an author, everyone is an artist, everyone is someone.
Absolutely, yeah.
But again, I think the critique that even Lyotard puts will be applicable here, because what about people who can't access them?
Yeah.
So where are their stories? What will happen to their stories?
Yeah.
So in a way, this is also becoming a grand narrative in which some people cannot be accommodated.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always a degree of exclusivity about the public space. I mean, we can make the argument that it's digital, so it's opened up to everyone. But then that's not quite true. I mean, what about people who don't have access to that, and what about their stories? So, I mean, these are very pertinent questions. And also, I mean, when it comes to representation, one of the ways in which subversive representation takes place is going against realism, going against common sense, logic, etc. So how do you think Catherine Belsey's idea of opacity fits in a way up? Because she is quite clearly defining the ontology of opacity in the sense that, this is against common sense, and she considers common sense as an ally of totalitarianism. So do you think that...
No, like one thing that I was relieved after reading listening to Belsey lecture, because somehow I found a reason for putting my time and reading texts that are really difficult.
Yes.
So that was a kind of relief. Okay, like I'm doing this because they had deliberately wanted us to think that it's a text and to be removed from the process and to think critically. So that was it was a relief for me. So I think in that way, Belsey's text asks us to question our idea of cognition, like how we think, like to understand something clearly means we have a correct understanding. So that is deconstructed there, which I think is very much important at this level, because what we especially in a world where again it's kind of simulacrum, we don't know which is truth, which is post-truth. So the idea of to question our own cognition or our own way of understanding is very much important in this setting. That's
absolutely. But I think it's important that we talk about cognition, because what this particular course had aimed to do, I mean, this is something I spent some time at the beginning of the course, is looking at the relationship between the inside and the outside, between how you think in the brain, how you process in the brain, how do certain codes are processed in the brain, and how that relates to the apparatus outside, the ideological apparatus, the environmental apparatus, the material apparatus, and how these cease to be different categories. They sort of blend together in a way we think. So cognition is a very important concept in cultural studies, and we can sort of again go back to the Orwell essay and see the white man with the gun is cognized as not just a human being but a machine operating colonialism, operating imperialism. And of course that wouldn't work today. If a white man goes with a gun in Burma, you'd be considered a terrorist or whatever, but not a figure of authority anymore, because the political climate has changed, the outside has changed. So the way we process the white man with a gun will automatically change by default. That's a very good point. And also the whole question of difficulty becomes important, because it's difficult to be consumed. Right? It's not meant for easy consumption. It's not meant for easy reading. And that's why if you look at Lyotard's ending, he makes a difference between Proust and Joyce, in the sense that he says that Proust is difficult, but then he still sticks to a tradition of novel writing, whereas Joyce invents a new kind of novel writing in Finnegan's Wake, which makes it very difficult as a text to consume, and that becomes what Barth had talked about, readerly and writerly texts. So writerly texts are those texts which expect you to be the writer as well, so you can't just be a passive reader and consume it. And that same goes for culture as well. I mean, culture as a text, if you are to be a collaborator of the text, then you need to be an active participant in the text rather than consuming it passively. So that's a very important point, I think. Now, how do you think that relates to, I mean, because you once mentioned gender already, how do you think that relates to Butler's understanding of gender as we studied in this course?
About inside and outside.
Yeah, inside, outside, markers of identity, subversive quality, performativity. So how do you think Butler is important, not just for gender studies, but also that theoretical apparatus which he offers, how does it connect to some of the other things which you do in culture.
So one thing that you repeated in the lecture was she brings in post-structuralism, gender studies, and postmodernism.
Yes.
Yeah. So in that sense, and also she bring out how gender or even other performative identities are a process rather than something rigid or concrete. So that is something that I think we can apply to like most of the identities that we stick on to or we think like a person is. So everybody is in a process of flux. Like every identity is in a process of flux or a process in itself other than something concrete. Like I can't say like I'm a woman, but I'm also other things. Like I'm a process. It's so that is something that I found very much interesting from Butler's essay.
So I think it's I don't know, is there like degree of internalization of as well from like the inside and the outside? So whatever codes we are like absorbing on the outside, we are just like internalizing.
Yes. Like, that's Butler also says that like how we like how gender is also internalized and we are outperforming it also, like it's acquired. So
but then it's interesting because what you just said, that can be applied to culture as well, right? Because culture is again not a fixed product. It's something which is always a process of flux. It's changing all the time. And what often interests me as a student of culture is the difference between high culture and low culture, how that very quickly changes in different historical points of time. So just to give a few examples, Shakespeare was very low body culture when he was actually writing his plays and producing his plays, and when no one really looked at Shakespeare as sophisticated playwright, because he didn't go to university, he wasn't a university wit, unlike Ben Jonson, Thomas Kidd, but that he was more of a self-taught playwright and who catered to the lowly masses who come and have a laugh. But then again, Shakespeare has become an industry today, and if you think of high culture, he's one of the first names which pop up in our mind. Same goes for, you can think of examples closer to home and in India. I can say for a fact, for instance, when Tagore was writing his poems initially, those were considered to be obscene and pornographic, and people were actually forbidden to read Tagore's poems, and middle-class Bengali women were forbidden to sing Tagore's songs because those are supposed to be very erotic in quality and not fitting into a normal Bengali middle-class household. But that changed very quickly. Right? Today Tagore is very much a high culture industry, not just in Bengal, but also across India. And I'm sure you can think of examples from other parts of India as well.
When it comes to like to South, like both or most of the dance forms here, like which is supposed to be classical and high class now, like Mohiniyattam or Bharatanatyam in Tamil Nadu and Mohiniyattam in Kerala, they were actually very erotic forms of dance, which was played by Devadasis in temples. So it was now like when it was played by Devadasis, like it was considered very like as you said, like it was not considered higher. It was something that they did to attract their customers. So but now like it has reached to a level when it's very high class, and the amount of effort and capital that people puts into it is so enormous. So and recently people are trying to bring back the original Sadar, like and they have been
what's the Sadar?
Sadar is the like the Devdasi form of which the precursor of Bharatanatyam.
Interesting.
So there was a recent workshop for Sadar, and the one of the last surviving Devdasis was conducting the workshop. So the steps are very different, and their the politics of the dance itself is different, which was kind of what should I say? It was sanitized by the Bharatanatyam like proponents into like something that we see today, which is a symbol of high culture, the Agraharam kind of.
So, I think even Allen Ginsberg's Howl, like if you see, like initially it was rejected by so many scholars, and like it wasn't considered high art at all, or high culture at all. But like as and when time progressed, people recognized what it stood for, the importance of it, and now it's recognized as one of the most popular works of Ginsberg. And I think besides that, a lot of cult movies which like are produced on the side.
Cinema is a very good example.
So for example, Tarantino's movies, it's all very violent and very masculine, but by the end of the day now it's like a mainstream cinema, and also a lot of critics have appreciated Tarantino's movies as well. So I think cult movies also become a very good example for
exactly. And how does one particular art form move, like both of you said, from the margins to the mainstream, right? And how that is appropriated. But interestingly, that process of appropriation is also very political, because, like you said, there's a degree of sanitization which takes place. Some of the edges are hewn away to make it more acceptable to the current value system, etc. So, I mean, like, for instance, you can think of Shakespeare, the entire Shakespeare industry, which is abridged to be consumed by children.
Yeah.
Right.
We all had abridged versions.
Exactly. Right. We grew up consuming Shakespeare as some kind of a moral fable. Is that within England, which does away with all the dirty humor, the body politics, and that's sanitized completely for middle class children, catering to the values. And when they grow up and they decide to study English, then they read the original thing, and sometimes are shocked and delighted simultaneously. So I think it's a very important point about the movement from the margins to the mainstream, and culture is all about movement, as we hope to establish in this course. It's just constantly a process of becoming, unbecoming, rebecoming. And what the term that we use, obviously, is textuality for that, right? So it's a very textual quality about culture. That's something we kept harping on. But also, equally importantly, is the idea of experientiality. Right, because one of the texts which we covered deliberately was Hacking's The Social Construction of What, which is a critique against the reductionism of over-textuality, where we consider everything to be a text. But then he talks about situations like the refugee problem, child abuse, some really disturbing problems of human civilization and human history. And if we reduce those as text only, then there's a danger of reification and also oversimplification, and that does a disservice to the actual event which takes place. So how do you think experientiality plays out as a component of culture? I mean, we talked about textuality, movement, flux, etc., but experientiality, human experience?
Again, like, I'm kind of confused because we can't take all experiences as text.
Right.
Like, as you said, about the refugee problem,
Yeah.
or when it comes to victims,
Yes.
like even sexual harassment victims. Like, you can't just take the stories as stories, but it's
Absolutely.
an experience.
Absolutely.
And it's not something that should be just studied, but it's
Yes.
something more than that.
Yeah.
So even when people tell their own experience,
Yeah.
for me, my experience is not a text. Like,
Yeah.
if somebody is like trying to deconstruct my experience as a text, it is a kind of violence that is done to me.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
similarly, like, when you are trying to reduce experience into text, I think there is a kind of violence. It's
Yes.
again a kind of sanitization, or
Or oversimplification and
Yeah.
reducing it to something.
Like, even when we read newspapers, like, some events are just text to us. Like, people do discuss them, but somewhere I think the experience or the experience is lost. Like, so,
It becomes a very temporary matter.
Yeah.
It's just consuming
and
and
especially
moving on.
in this social media world, like, we just have a lot of images, lot of experiences thrown at us.
Yeah.
So in one photo you have something about the refugee crisis, in the next one you see someone very happy, like, going somewhere.
Yeah.
So, like, there is a kind of desensitization happening when you are actually like consuming experience as text.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely, yeah.
do we empathize? Like, I don't know whether we should empathize also with experience of others.
Yeah.
But how do we respect their experience is the question.
Yeah.
So the level of which we consider it as a text, or like how far can we read them as a text,
Yeah.
because it's an experience of someone else.
Absolutely.
So
empathy becomes a very key category in culture in terms of how we cognize certain things. And I was thinking when you're saying about Facebook and how someone puts up a very gory photo of a very disturbing event, and then you scroll down and see someone having popcorn in a mall, which is a complete contrast to that. And then you scroll down again and see something different. So I think it's a very complex cognitive space. Right?
I think somewhere we are losing our emotional...
Exactly. I mean, it's so temporal in quality.
Yes.
It's so random in quality that you just randomly log into your Facebook, scroll down your wall, and see all kinds of cognitively contrasting images. And as a subject, as a human subject, the degree of response you have to each will vary by your association. So empathy becomes a very contested category in modern
and
culture.
I think somewhere we become numb because we consume a lot of contrasting emotions or contrasting images. And eventually, after hours of scrolling, what we feel is kind of a very numb thing.
Absolutely. It's a bit like Aristotelian catharsis, where all the emotions are equaled away, and we emerge out of Facebook as numb citizens with any kind of potential for subversion done away with. So that's something which is very interesting, I think. So I think numbness is a very important category, because numbness can quickly translate into violence, right? And you find there are different kinds of violence which takes place in the culture we inhabit today, not just physical or corporeal, but also epistemic, as you mentioned, deeply psychological. So violence becomes a very important category, and this is what Zizek talks about in his last book, the last book in this course, Welcome to the Desert of the Real, where he looks at the collusion between the entertainment industry and the grammar of violence. And when he says when 9/11 happened, the way it was telecast and spread and disseminated in the media across the world had the same grammar of visuality that the Hollywood disaster movies used prior to that, right? So again, we're looking at a very disturbing blend between the entertainment industry which we consume and the real spectacle of violence which is supposed to repel us. And this is exactly what both of you said in terms of being numb, being cognitively torn between empathy and repulsion. And a time comes we can't differentiate the two at all. So how do you, just to conclude this session, how do you look at Zizek's analysis in terms of the culture we inhabit today? That's very topical. That's the text that maybe speaks to us most closely.
So I agree to that text, because as he said, it can be taken to Indian context also. Most of the events that is happening here, it's discussed, rediscussed, reified, and it's studied in such a way that at the end of the day, we are done with that. We are no longer in a position to react to that, because we have done so much discussion on that.
There's an exhaustion which comes in the end.
So there is a kind of mental exhaustion or emotional exhaustion that is happening, that leaves us again in a state of numbness. We are not ready to react to it. So it can be any news, even with the recent rape cases. So there are a lot of them happening, and it's discussed, it's rediscussed. There are Facebook posts, there are TV shows, and people are shouting, people are crying, but at the end of the day, there is no relevant action that can be happening. And somewhere it's repeated again and again. Things are getting more gross. So there is some kind of again, it's consumed as entertainment rather than experienced, or rather than we are not able to relate ourselves to the experience, but we are consuming it like entertainment.
So I think here the experience is getting reduced to a text, and we're just on the surface consuming those texts and just moving on with our lives.
A very condensed HD visual text, right?
And since there is this level of mental exhaustion, we no longer even want to empathize, I guess. We just read it as any other news and just move on.
And I think because it's simplified to a text, there is a kind of distance that is also happening. Somewhere we think it won't happen to us, because it's removed from us. It is at a distance from our own self. So we believe that we won't become a victim. So there is...
It's a difference between me and the popcorn, right? What I consume cannot be me, right?
So there is this difference that stops us from kind of identifying with this experience. So there is no real action happening, but there is action happening. So
which is unreal, sometimes hyper-real.
And there is a level we don't know which is the truth or what is really happening, because there are many different views. So it's necessary to have different views, different narratives, but somewhere
amidst the multiple narratives, the truth is getting lost.
And again, truth can be also questioned, but the experience itself is getting reduced to that. I think what is happening.
This tendency towards textuality that we have, whether we are passively scrolling Facebook or actively reporting a news. I mean, we tend to convert that into a text, the entire event into a text, entire experience into a text.
And I think so all the experiences are getting reduced to social media consumption, either through images or through Facebook posts, statuses, etc. And for anything there'll be an event creation. Are you attending this event?
Absolutely.
So
it's a mourning event or a grieving event.
Or a celebration.
A lot of theatricality to anything.
Exactly.
Even while reporting such gross events, it brings in background music, there is camera angle, and exclusive stories are done on this event, which brings in so much,
and the color changes, it becomes gray.
So somewhere it becomes text, just a text for entertainment or something to be consumed.
Absolutely.
Where the experience is lost.
Absolutely.
So
maybe
it's a process of catharsis that's happening, but the experience is not respected.
Absolutely. It's a very complex politics of representation that we experience today, whether it's journalism or self-reporting, or like Shashi said, creating an event and making that some kind of a celebratory ritual, whether it's an event of mourning or grieving. It's still a public thing where you participate with certain codes. And that does take away the real experience of the event in a very complex way. So thank you for the conversation. That was very interesting, I thought. And with that, we end this particular course. We hope we got something out of it, and we look forward to seeing you and interacting with you in the different forums that we have in the times to come. Thank you for your attention.